then the first four harmonics will be 100, 300, 500, and so on. The odd number harmonics. And so the next equation that we took a look at says, okay, now let's say we model this as a Helmholtz resonator. When you do that, it's a little more difficult. This is the one that's V over 2 pi times the square root of the area divided by length, the effective length of the neck times the volume. And so area, length, and volume, these are all your dimensional aspects here in under the square root, and V over 2 pi. What, does anybody remember what the value of V is that we can use on the exam or wherever? That's good. So if we recall that, V is equal to 343 meters per second. That's the value we're going to use. And we talked about how that can change very, maybe if we're breathing in, for example, helium. We could use a different gas than air. Or we can go up really high in altitude and the gas becomes rarefied. But for the most part, here at sea level, we can determine V to be that value. So that's good. All right, so we know what V is. 2 pi is just a number, square root. And so what are these different things here? Well, V is the volume. And remember, this is modeled as sort of a bottle. And this is the way it might work if this were the pharynx and the oral chamber. Okay. And so the effective length of the neck of the bottle is our value L. The area of the bottle is our value A. And then the volume below L is value V. So those are the values that would be given to you that would go into that Helmholtz resonator equation. This actually is more accurate than this one in modeling the resonances of the vocal tract. So I'm not going to work an example like that. We worked lots of examples. I'm just kind of going over what the equations are and to find them. All right, so chapter 16 was speech recognition, analysis, and synthesis. There are several questions in chapter 16 that have to do with some of the terms and definitions. So know some of the basic terms we got in here. Take a look. You might have to look through the glossary for some of the answers to the exam. And
what chapter is that again?
Chapter 16. So spectrogram, etc. And you're always good to look at the glossary terms anyway in the back of the chapters, because these sort of kind of put a lot of these terms into perspective for you. So spectrogram, make sure you know what that is and how it plots this three-dimensional display of sound, because we're looking at frequency, volume, and time. And there is not a lot of analysis that takes place in chapter 16. So we sort of save some of that for chapter 17, where we get into more of the analysis. So look over chapter 16. Make sure you understand the mechanics that were discussed. Spectrogram, what a spectrograph is, what a spectrogram is, the differences between them. Take a look at the glossary terms. Look over the exercises you did. But then, as far as the more analysis goes, we're going to jump over to chapter 17. Chapter 17, the unit on speaking. In chapter 17, there is a table that we went over, figure 1711 on page 382. This talks about the different types of breathing. So you've got, and also you want to know sort of the apparatus of breathing, which is the muscles and skeletal features around the rib cage, and those organs like the diaphragm that plays a part, and the lungs, etc. And then also understand how to interpret that graph so that you can get a good idea of what the various reserves and volumes and capacities are if you were asked a question about the lungs and breathing on the exam, which I'm sure that you will be. Also on 377, we talked about some of the vocal tricks that can be done, sopranos, tuning their formants in order to amplify certain notes. Also, the male singer's formant, which can appear between 2 kilohertz and 3 kilohertz, around 2.5 kilohertz. So we talked about some techniques of singing in order for the voice to project. And then after that, what we want to do, and I'm not going to go over these again because we really spent a lot of time on it. The last 2 lectures are really on this. I want you to go over exercises 5 and 6 at the end of chapter 17 on singing. There'll be a question that's very similar to number 5, where you're given the flow rate, you're given the pressure, and you're asked to find the power that's generated. And you'll remember there are some conversions potentially that you have to do in there. And then after that, you've got some questions from number 6. And so we talked about techniques to find the intensity of sound in 6A. And then also the sound pressure. So 6A, which has the intensity and sound pressure that correspond to a certain sound level. Right? So you want to be sure to know how to do that. So 6A is going to definitely be on the exam. As far as the rest of that, the sound pressure, the comparisons, and the total radiated sound power, you don't have to do that, so don't worry too much about 6B, C, and D. But there'll definitely be questions on the exam about question 5 in chapter 17 and question 6A in chapter 17. So know how to do that, find the intensity using the inverse log function. And then also find the sound pressure that corresponds to that intensity. All right, other than that, basically if there's anything much more than that, then it's going to be covered in your review questions. And it's also going to be covered in the exercises. But those are the ones I wanted to sort of highlight. And if you are able to go back through that, watch this video again, and make sure you've got a pretty good handle on the things that were mentioned, then I think you'll do fairly well on the exam. And then other than that, you've got 50 minutes to take the exam. You may have to kind of dig through a little bit, and find some definitions, some terms, this and that. But hopefully, if you've pre-prepared with how to do some of the mathematical and more quantitative problems, then you'll be ready to wrap up the end of the semester on a good note. If you want to take part 2, it is Physics 1814. A lot of you have already signed up, but if you haven't, that's the continuation of the course into the next semester. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the science of sound and recording, so we get into electricity and magnetism a little bit, learn how microphones and speakers work. And I'm not sure how we're going to do the lab, because typically we create, we learn how to solder, and then learn how to, we put together a amplifier or some other lab project. So it'll be a little bit challenging to put the labs together, but they'll be sort of similar to the labs this semester. So wanted to advertise for 1814 a little bit. All right, any questions about exam 4? Nothing comes to mind. I'm sure something will come to mind. So if you have any questions that come up, just ask them through the homework help forum, or just email me, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. Great, very good. So here are the equations. Don't forget the equations that were used in numbers 5 and 6A of chapter 17. I didn't write those out, but they'll be provided for you on a sheet that you can print out before you take the exam. All right, well, thanks a lot, and we'll see you at exam time.